My name is Captain Emily Hart, United States Army, assigned to Fort Liberty. Most days, my job is predictable. Meetings, inspections, and paperwork that never seem to end. But the day I found my name engraved on a war medal inside the base museum, everything I knew about my life cracked open like glass. I had taken a group of recruits to the military archive wing, a place I'd passed 100 times but never paid much attention to. The air smelled of old metal and dust, the kind that sticks to uniforms and history. Behind the glass cases were rows of medals, documents, and faded photographs of heroes long gone. Then, I saw it. A bronze medal with a small plaque beneath it. Captain Emily R. Hart. Operation Scorched Valley, 2003. For a second, I thought it was a typo. My brain tried to explain it away. Maybe it was another Hart. Another Emily. The Army has thousands. But the date stopped me cold. 2003. I was 17 that year, still in high school, not yet enlisted. I pressed closer to the glass, reading the inscription again, half expecting the letters to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. The world around me went quiet, the hum of the air conditioner fading, the voices of the recruits muffled like sounds underwater. My stomach tightened. I stared at that medal as if it might blink, as if it might explain itself. The display card said it was awarded for rescue under fire. I'd never been in a battle like that, not even close. My service record began a decade later. But there it was. My name carved in metal, sitting in a frame labeled Historical Commendations. I felt my pulse hammer behind my ears, sharp and fast. A young soldier beside me said something, but I couldn't hear him. My thoughts raced too loudly. I kept thinking about my personnel file, about every form and date stamped with precision. None of it matched this. And yet, that plaque looked official, approved, authenticated. Whoever made it believed it was real, or wanted me to believe it was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing my name under the museum lights, the bronze catching reflections, like a signal. A part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Another part wanted to tear the exhibit apart until I found who had placed it there. I'd earned medals before, but this one felt like a ghost. Something buried deep had found its way to the surface, and it carried my name. The next morning, I went back alone. The doors were still locked, the hallway dim. I stood in front of the glass case again, and for the first time, I noticed something I'd missed. A small handwritten note was tucked behind the medal's frame, barely visible through the edge of the glass. My breath caught. It wasn't part of the exhibit. The ink had bled slightly with age, but I could still read the first line. It said, "For Emily, when she's ready." That was when I realized this wasn't a mistake. Someone had left it for me, and whoever it was, they knew exactly who I was before I did. The medal wasn't just metal and ribbon. It was a symbol, a story. And for me, it was a story that shouldn't have existed. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That plaque with my name, set under glass like a fact. My father had served in the Army for most of his life, Lieutenant Dana Hart. He was the kind of soldier others quoted, calm, exact, always composed, the kind of man who knew what to say with a single glance. He died when I was 12, taken too early by cancer that hit fast and ended faster. We buried him with full honors. I remember the folded flag, the silence at the gravesite, the way my mother clutched my hand like she was afraid we'd lose each other too. He'd always wanted me to choose my own path, but I think deep down, he hoped it would be the uniform. I made that choice the day I turned 20. Joining the Army felt like filling a space that had gone hollow after he left. I didn't want to chase his shadow, but I wanted to understand what had shaped him. Every step I took in uniform was my way of walking with him, even if the path wasn't the same. That's why the medal shook me so hard, because if it were real, it meant someone had lived a part of my story without me. The battle etched into the frame, Operation Scorched Valley, was one of the more obscure missions in 2003. A small task force had been ambushed while escorting civilians in a mountainous region near the Syrian border. One officer reportedly held the line under heavy fire, protecting the wounded and coordinating a medevac while injured himself. It was considered an act of heroism, the kind that shaped careers. But my name didn't belong anywhere near it. I wasn't there. I couldn't have been. That year, I was still wearing braces and staying up too late watching sitcoms. I barely knew how to drive. And yet, someone had paired that story with my name, locked it behind glass, and left a note addressed to me. The weight of that confused me more than I could explain. It wasn't just a wrong detail. It felt intentional, personal. I sat in my room for hours that night, holding a photo of my father in his dress blues. His eyes stared past the camera, just like they always had, like he saw more than what was in front of him. I whispered questions into that silence, hoping he'd answer from wherever he was. But all I got back was memory. I thought about the times he taught me how to lace my boots, even before I'd earned them. How he always stood during the national anthem, even at home, even when he was sick. He believed in honor the way some people believe in prayer. It wasn't something you wore, it was something you carried. If the medal was fake, it felt like a stain on his name. If it were real, then someone had hidden it from me my entire life. Either way, I couldn't let it go. That medal had meaning, and I needed to know who gave it that meaning and why they thought it should bear my name. After my father died, the house grew quiet in a way that never quite lifted. My mom filled the space with noise. She kept the TV on during dinner, played music while folding laundry, anything to drown out the silence he left behind. But there were certain silences she never touched. His study was one of them. The door stayed locked from the day of the funeral. She said it was for storage now, that there wasn't anything in there I needed. Once, when I was 13, I tried the doorknob. It didn't budge. I pressed my ear to the wood, hoping to hear something on the other side. I didn't know what. Maybe his voice? She never let me wear his uniform jacket. I found it once, buried in a box behind the coats, still smelling faintly like him. When I asked if I could keep it in my room, she shook her head, said it belonged in the past. That word always sounded final when she said it. For years, I thought she was just grieving in her own way. But as I got older, the grief started to look like avoidance. If I mentioned his service, she'd change the subject. If a war movie came on TV, she'd leave the room. Once, I found her staring at a photo of him, her eyes glazed and distant, like she was somewhere I couldn't follow. The thing that stuck with me most, though, was the man by the fence. It happened more than once. I'd be walking out of school and spot a figure near the edge of the lot. Always in the same place, by the chain-link fence near the football field. He wore a baseball cap, pulled low, and stood with his hands in his pockets, never speaking, never moving much. I assumed it was someone's dad waiting for their kid, but something about him felt familiar. The first time I told my mom, she tensed. She didn't ask for details, just said I was probably imagining things and told me not to worry. After that, I stopped mentioning him, but I still saw him. Not every day, just enough to keep the image alive. Years later, I convinced myself it was nothing. My mind fills in gaps left by grief. But now, after seeing that medal, the image came back sharper. The tilt of the shoulders, the way he stood still, but alert. It reminded me of someone trained to wait. At the time, I didn't understand why I kept looking back at that fence. Now I wonder if a part of me always knew something wasn't right. The house, the silence, the man in the cap. They were all pieces of something I wasn't supposed to see. I went back to the museum early the next morning before anyone else arrived. The room felt colder than I remembered, like the air hadn't been touched in hours. I stood in front of the display again, my eyes fixed on the medal as if it might vanish if I blinked too long. This time, I noticed a small slit in the velvet backing just behind the plaque. My fingers trembled as I reached in, careful not to set off the motion sensor. I pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, creased like it had been hidden for years. I unfolded it slowly, afraid of what I might find. It wasn't long, just a few lines in neat, slanted handwriting. The ink had faded, but was still legible. The first thing I saw was the name at the top, Dana Hart. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at it, waiting for the letters to shift into something else, something that made sense, but they didn't. It was his name, my father's name. I scanned the rest of the note, which listed coordinates, a date, and a single sentence. Mission cleared under fire. One survivor confirmed. No formal record. The handwriting stopped me. It looked exactly like the way he used to sign my birthday cards. Precise, firm, with a slight curve at the end of each H. My heart thudded against my ribs, louder than anything else in the room. I didn't know whether to feel sick or hopeful. This wasn't just an old artifact. It was personal. And whoever had placed it there had done so knowing I would find it. I sat on the museum bench, gripping the paper like it might dissolve in my hands. Everything I had believed about my father's death started to slip. What if he hadn't died in 1995? What if he had disappeared on purpose? The questions felt too big to hold. I wanted to scream, or cry, or tear through every drawer in the records room until something else makes this make sense. But beneath all that, something else stirred, a whisper of something dangerous. Hope, and that scared me most of all. Because hope, once it sparks, refuses to stay quiet. And I wasn't ready for what it might cost to follow it. The deeper I went, the more the walls seemed to close in. I used my clearance to access the digital archives first, scanning mission logs from 2003. But nothing under Operation Scorched Valley came up. It was as if the entire mission had never existed. I knew better. Even erased missions leave fingerprints. I pulled shift logs from the field hospitals in that region, looking for anything out of place. A 2-day window in April showed an unusual spike in medevac traffic, with redacted names and scrambled coordinates. Buried in one of the encrypted folders, I found a maintenance report for a Black Hawk that landed at an unscheduled time and location. It matched the coordinates from the handwritten note. The report was routine, but the timing wasn't. Someone had tried to clean it up, but not completely. Then I found the team journal. It wasn't official, just a scanned notebook labeled Bravo 9 Debrief. Most of the pages were mundane, until one entry stopped me cold. The 17th of April, 2003. Entry said, took heavy fire. Civilian casualties. One ghost pulled us out. That's the word they used. Ghost. I sat back, heart pounding. They never named him. Just described someone moving through smoke and bullets. Like he didn't belong there. Coordinated the evac, then vanished. No rank, no badge, no record. The language was raw, tired, scared. Not the kind of thing written for a report. More like a confession. I read it over and over, gripping the screen like it might disappear. Every instinct told me someone had wiped the official record. Not by mistake, on purpose. And that meant whoever this ghost was, he wasn't supposed to be known. I closed the file and stared at the dark screen. The silence felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing back. I wasn't sure who I was more afraid of. The people who buried the truth. Or the truth itself. I found him living in a 1-story house outside Amarillo, Texas. His name was Mark Devlin, listed as a retired staff sergeant, medically discharged. I'd cross-checked his name with the flight logs, narrowed it down to the team in the erased operation. He didn't answer the door at first. When he finally opened it, he didn't ask who I was. Just stared at my uniform and said he hadn't worn one in 20 years. I told him I wasn't here on official business. I just needed answers. We sat in the backyard under a rusted patio roof. He drank his beer slowly, barely looking at me. At first, he claimed he didn't remember much. Said the desert messed with your memory, scrambled faces and timelines. But when I said the name Dana Hart, he froze. His hand tightened around the bottle. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then he said there was a man during that mission. Tall, calm, didn't speak much. Showed up out of nowhere when the squad was pinned. Directed the fire team like he knew the terrain better than they did. dragged 2 men out under heavy fire. He said the man vanished as fast as he appeared. When the brass came in for debrief, they were told not to mention him. Just a hallucination under stress, they said. Nobody questioned it. Not if they wanted to keep their pensions. I asked if he ever learned the man's name. He hesitated, then nodded. One of the guys whispered it before the chopper took off. Said the man called himself Dana Hart. Mark looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. He said if that man was real, then someone in command wanted him buried. Said he shouldn't exist. And if I were carrying that name, I should be careful. My hands were shaking as I left. The pieces were lining up too well. My father. The metal. The ghost in the fire. If what Mark said was true, then my father hadn't died. He disappeared, on purpose, and he never planned to be found. I followed a whisper all the way to a cabin near the edge of Talkeetna, Alaska. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked up the path, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The house was plain, weathered wood with a roof patched by hand, but it was the man on the porch that stopped me cold. He was older than I remembered. His hair was thinner, eyes set deeper, lines carved from years I hadn't lived beside him. But I knew that face. I had seen it in framed photos, in my dreams, in the mirror, when I was tired. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me with something between fear and recognition. My throat tightened. I tried to speak, but all I could manage was his name. Not Dad, not even Dana, just a sound that barely left my lips. He nodded once, slow and heavy, like he'd been expecting this. Said he wondered how long it would take, that he hoped I'd never find him, but knew I would. His voice was rougher than I remembered, not from age, but from silence. We sat on an old bench behind the house. Trees surrounded us like guards, keeping time with the wind. He told me the story I'd been chasing in pieces. A Black Ops mission that went off book. Lives on the line. One way in, no way out. The kind of work that came with no name and no return. He said they staged the funeral to protect us, that if he'd come back, it would have put us all in danger. He hated himself for it every day. Said he watched from a distance, that he was proud of me, that he left the medal to give me the truth he couldn't say out loud. I didn't cry right away. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to hold him, to demand why he let me mourn a ghost while he lived in the cold. But all I did was stare at the ground, waiting for the anger to move through me. It didn't. Not fully. He reached into his coat and handed me a photo. It was me, at basic training, taken from far away. Said he was there that day. He'd always been there, watching graduations, promotions, the museum trip. The silence between us stretched long and wide. Then he whispered that he was tired, not from hiding, from being half a person. I told him I didn't know what to feel. That part of me wanted to walk away. But I stayed. We sat there until the sun dropped behind the trees. I left the next morning. He didn't ask me to stay. I think he knew better. Some things can't be repaired. But he gave me one last hug. And for a moment, I was 10 years old again. Not a soldier, just a daughter, trying to make sense of the man who came back from the dead. I never wore the medal. Not once. It sits inside a shadow box on my shelf, next to a photo of my father in uniform. His face is calm in that picture, eyes steady, like he knew something I hadn't yet learned. The medal still catches light sometimes, just enough to remind me it's there. It doesn't make noise, doesn't demand attention, but it holds a weight heavier than anything on my uniform. It doesn't stand for what I did. It stands for what I discovered. For the questions I asked, the silence I broke, the truth I carried even when I didn't want to. Some people wear medals to show where they've been. I keep mine as a reminder of where the story almost ended, and where it quietly began again. That mission, the one hidden in shadows, wasn't about recognition. It was about choice, sacrifice, and the cost of carrying a life in secret. My father was never buried in Arlington, but a part of him is buried in that box. in the folds of the flag, in the edges of the paper, in the stillness of a name that shouldn't have returned. I don't need the world to know what he did, or what I found. Honor isn't about what hangs on your chest. It's about what you refuse to let go of. Every morning I pass that box, and I nod once. That's enough. That's all it ever needed to be.